252 million years ago, the Earth exhaled after the greatest dying it had ever known, and in that slow, patient breath, the first dinosaurs began to walk. The Permian-Triassic extinction had scoured the planet, erasing 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates, leaving behind a world that was silent, empty, scorched by volcanic winters, and choked by acidic rains. The supercontinent Pangaea stretched from pole to pole, a vast expanse of red deserts and shallow seas, and the air itself was different then, thicker, richer in carbon dioxide, warmer by several degrees than the world you know. The sky was a deeper blue, almost violet at the zenith, and the sun rose over landscapes that had never known the shadow of a tree taller than a fern, had never heard the call of a bird, had never felt the footfall of anything larger than a dog. But life, as it always does, persisted, adapted, evolved, and in the quiet margins of this recovering world, in the shade of cycads and the shelter of conifer groves, the archosaurs began their long, slow transformation into the rulers of the Mesozoic. The earliest dinosaurs were small, no larger than a turkey, bipedal creatures with hollow bones and grasping hands, moving through the undergrowth with a nervous, darting energy. Eoraptor, whose name means dawn thief, lived 231 million years ago in what is now Argentina, in a river valley flanked by volcanic highlands where the air smelled of sulfur and wet stone. It was a meter long from snout to tail, weighing perhaps 10 kilograms, with a slender build and a mix of leaf-shaped and serrated teeth, suggesting a diet that was opportunistic, omnivorous, taking whatever the landscape offered: small vertebrates, insects, early plants, carrion left by larger predators. Eoraptor's hands had 5 fingers, though only 3 bore claws strong enough for grasping, and its eyes were large, set forward in the skull, giving it depth perception, the ability to judge distances, to leap from rock to rock, to snatch prey from the air or the ground with precision. It moved on its hind legs, its tail held straight behind for balance, and when it ran, which it did often, it was fast, agile, capable of sudden bursts of speed that carried it away from danger, into the safety of dense vegetation where larger predators could not follow. The world Eoraptor inhabited was not yet dominated by dinosaurs. The Triassic was a time of experimentation, of competition, of multiple lineages vying for ecological niches, and the early dinosaurs shared their world with Cretaceans, the ancestors of modern crocodiles, who were far more diverse, far more successful in the early Triassic than the dinosaurs themselves. There were armored etosaurs, herbivorous quadrupeds covered in bony plates, rooting through the soil for tubers and roots. There were phytosaurs, crocodile-like predators that lurked in rivers and lakes, their nostrils positioned high on their skulls, allowing them to breathe while submerged, waiting for prey to come to the water's edge. There were Rauisuchians, massive carnivores that walked on 4 legs, or sometimes on 2, apex predators with skulls as long as your arm, teeth like daggers, bodies built for ambush, for the sudden explosive charge that ended in bone-crushing jaws closing around the neck of a prey animal. The dinosaurs, in this world, were marginal, opportunistic, occupying the spaces the Cretaceans did not, surviving in the shadows, waiting for their moment. Herrerasaurus was another early dinosaur, slightly larger than Eoraptor, living in the same region, the same time, the same river valleys of late Triassic Argentina. It was a carnivore, unambiguously, with a skull built for biting, for tearing, for holding struggling prey. Its jaws were lined with serrated teeth that curved backward, designed to slice through flesh to grip and rip, and its lower jaw had a joint that allowed it to slide forward, increasing the gape, allowing it to take larger bites, to swallow chunks of meat whole. Herrerasaurus was 3 to 6 meters long, depending on the individual, weighing perhaps 200 kilograms, and it hunted the herbivores of its time, the early sauropodomorphs, the rhynchosaurs, the dicynodonts that still lingered from the Permian. It was a pursuit predator, built for running, for chasing, for endurance, and its long legs and powerful tail gave it speed, stability, the ability to turn sharply, to follow fleeing prey through dense vegetation across open ground into the water if necessary. When Herrerasaurus killed, it did so with precision, with a bite to the neck or the spine, severing nerves, collapsing the prey, and then it fed, tearing away strips of muscle, cracking bones for marrow, eating until it was sated, until it could eat no more, and then it rested, digesting, sleeping in the shade, waiting for hunger to return. The climate of the Triassic was extreme, more extreme than anything in the modern world. Pangeia's interior was a vast desert, the Pangaean mega-monsoon bringing seasonal rains to the coasts, but leaving the heartland dry, baked, lifeless for much of the year. Temperatures in the interior could reach 50 degrees Celsius during the day, dropping to near freezing at night, and the animals that lived there had to adapt, had to find ways to survive the heat, the cold, the scarcity of water. Many were nocturnal, emerging only after sunset, when the air cooled, when the stars appeared in the violet sky, when the only sounds were the rustle of wind through dry grasses and the distant calls of predators. Others estivated, burying themselves in the sand, slowing their metabolism, waiting for the rains, for the brief explosion of life that followed the first storms, when the desert bloomed, when pools filled with water, when prey became abundant, and the world for a few short weeks was green. The nights in the Triassic were long, profound, filled with a darkness that the modern world has forgotten. There were no cities, no lights, no glow on the horizon, only the stars, brilliant and uncountable, stretching across the sky in rivers of light, in clouds of luminescence that marked the spiral arms of the galaxy. The moon rose, smaller then, closer to the Earth, its face pocked with fresh craters, and its light fell across the landscape in silver sheets, illuminating the shapes of sleeping animals, the silhouettes of trees, the glint of water in distant pools. The temperature dropped, the air grew still, and the world held its breath, waiting for dawn, for the sun to rise again, for warmth to return, for life to resume its slow, patient rhythm. Platosaurus was one of the first large dinosaurs, a prosauropod, an early relative of the giant sauropods that would dominate the Jurassic. It lived in the late Triassic, around 214 million years ago, in what is now Europe, in floodplains and river deltas, where vegetation was more abundant, where water was more reliable. Plateosaurus was 7 to 10 meters long, weighing up to 4 tons, and it was a herbivore, feeding on the tough fibrous plants of the Triassic, cycads, ferns, conifers, horsetails. Its teeth were leaf-shaped, serrated along the edges, designed for cutting, for shearing, for processing plant material, and its jaw muscles were powerful, capable of generating the force needed to chew through tough leaves, through woody stems. Platosaurus could walk on all fours, or rear up on its hind legs, using its long neck to reach high into the canopy, to browse on foliage that other herbivores could not access, and its hands, though not as specialized as those of later sauropods, had large claws that could have been used for defense, for digging, for pulling down branches. The posture of Plateosaurus, the way it moved, the way it stood, has been debated for decades. Early reconstructions showed it as a bipedal animal, walking upright like a human, but more recent studies suggest it was facultatively quadrupedal, capable of moving on all fours when feeding or moving slowly, but able to rear up on its hind legs when necessary, when threatened, when reaching for food. Its tail was long, heavy, muscular, serving as a counterbalance, and when Plateosaurus walked on 2 legs, its body was horizontal, its head held low, its tail sweeping behind, and the ground trembled just slightly with each footfall, a rhythm that echoed through the forest. A slow, steady beat that announced its presence, that warned smaller animals to move aside, to make way for the giant. The digestion of plant material in Plateosaurus was a slow, laborious process, requiring hours, sometimes days, to break down the cellulose, to extract the nutrients locked within the tough cell walls. Plateosaurus likely had a complex gut, filled with bacteria and other microorganisms that fermented the plant matter, producing heat, producing gases, producing the energy needed to sustain a body that weighed several tons. It fed constantly, almost continuously, moving from one patch of vegetation to the next, stripping leaves, cropping branches, swallowing stones, gastroliths that ground together in its stomach, mechanically breaking down the food, aiding digestion. These stones, polished smooth by the constant churning, have been found with Plateosaurus fossils, evidence of a digestive system that was already sophisticated, already adapted to the challenges of herbivory. Coelophysis was a small, gracile theropod living in the late Triassic of North America, in what is now New Mexico, in a landscape of rivers and floodplains, of seasonal droughts and sudden floods. It was 2 to 3 meters long, weighing only 15 to 30 kilograms, and it was built for speed, for agility, for quick darting movements. Its bones were hollow, filled with air sacs that reduced weight, that made it lighter, faster, more efficient, and its legs were long and slender, with powerful muscles that could propel it forward in explosive bursts, reaching speeds of perhaps 30 kilometers per hour. Coelophysis hunted in packs, or at least in groups, as evidenced by mass death assemblages where hundreds of individuals were found together, preserved in a single catastrophic event, perhaps a flash flood, perhaps a drought that drove them to a shrinking water source where they died of thirst, of starvation, of disease. The social behavior of Coelophysis is uncertain, but the presence of so many individuals in one place suggests some level of gregariousness, some tendency to gather, to move together, to hunt together, to find safety in numbers. The diet of Coelophysis was varied, opportunistic, including small vertebrates, fish, insects, and possibly even other Coelophysis, as some specimens have been found with juvenile bones in their stomach cavities, suggesting cannibalism, though this interpretation is controversial, as the bones could have been scavenged, could have been ingested after death. Coelophysis had sharp recurved teeth, serrated like steak knives, designed for slicing through flesh, for holding struggling prey, and its jaws were lined with dozens of these teeth, replacements growing continuously throughout its life, ensuring that it always had a full set, always had the tools it needed to kill, to eat, to survive. When Coelophysis fed, it did so with a delicate precision, using its hands to hold the carcass, its teeth to strip away flesh, its neck to toss back chunks of meat, swallowing them whole, feeling them slide down its throat into its stomach, where acids and enzymes began the slow process of digestion. The Triassic sky was empty of birds, empty of the calls and songs that fill the modern world, but it was not silent. Pterosaurs had already appeared, the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, gliding on membranous wings stretched between elongated forefingers and their bodies, soaring over rivers and lakes, diving for fish, for insects, for whatever they could catch. The earliest pterosaurs were small, sparrow-sized, with long tails and teeth, and they filled a niche that would later be occupied by birds, by bats, by the flying dinosaurs that had not yet evolved. The air itself was different, thicker, warmer, and flight was easier, required less energy, less effort. And the pterosaurs took advantage of this, spreading across Pangaea, diversifying, evolving into forms that would, in the Jurassic and Cretaceous, become giants, become the largest flying animals that ever lived. The rivers of the Triassic ran red with sediment, carrying the eroded remains of ancient mountains, depositing layers of silt and sand that would, over millions of years, become the rocks that preserve the fossils we study today. These rivers were lifelines, arteries of water cutting through the desert, supporting corridors of green where plants grew thick, where animals congregated, where life was concentrated in narrow bands along the banks. The water was warm, shallow, filled with fish and amphibians, and the dinosaurs came to drink, to cool themselves, to hunt, wading into the shallows, snapping at the silver flashes of scales, feeling the current tug at their legs, feeling the mud squelch beneath their feet. The end of the Triassic, 201 million years ago, was marked by another mass extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, which wiped out many of the crustaceans, many of the competitors that had kept the dinosaurs in check, that had prevented them from dominating the landscape. The cause of this extinction is still debated, but it likely involved massive volcanic eruptions, the breakup of Pangaea, the release of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, leading to rapid climate change, to ocean acidification, to the collapse of ecosystems. The dinosaurs survived, perhaps because of their upright posture, their efficient respiratory systems, their ability to regulate body temperature, and in the aftermath, in the empty world left behind, they radiated, they diversified, they grew, and the Jurassic began, the age of giants, the age when dinosaurs would truly rule the earth. But here, in the Triassic, in the dawn of their reign, the dinosaurs were still small, still cautious, still learning how to be giants, and the world they inhabited was quiet, vast, ancient, a world of deep time and slow change, a world where the only sounds were the wind, the rain, the distant rumble of volcanoes, and the soft footfalls of creatures that would, in time, become legends, become myths, become the giants that still walk through our dreams. Our stories are deepest memories of a world that was, a world that will never be again, a world that sleeps now in stone, in fossils, in the silent testimony of bones buried beneath the weight of 200 million years. The Jurassic world belonged to the giants, to creatures so vast that their footsteps registered on seismographs of deep time, to animals whose necks reached into the canopy like living bridges between earth and sky, to beings whose hearts pumped blood upward through columns of flesh and bone, with a pressure that would rupture the vessels of any modern mammal. The sauropods were the largest land animals that ever lived, and they dominated the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods for over 140 million years, a span of time so immense that it dwarfs the entire history of human civilization, a reign so successful that their fossils have been found on every continent, in deserts and forests and floodplains, in rocks that were once mud, once sand, once the bottom of ancient seas. They were herbivores, feeding on the vast forests of conifers, cycads, ferns, and ginkgos that covered the Mesozoic world, and their bodies were built for one purpose: to consume enormous quantities of plant material, to convert vegetation into flesh, to grow, to survive, to reproduce, to pass their genes forward through the millennia. Brachiosaurus was one of the tallest sauropods, standing 13 meters high at the shoulder, with a neck that extended upward like a crane, allowing it to browse on foliage that no other herbivore could reach. It lived in the late Jurassic, around 150 million years ago, in what is now North America and Africa, in river valleys and coastal plains, where rainfall was abundant, where vegetation grew thick and lush. Brachiosaurus weighed between 30 and 60 tons, depending on the individual, and its body was supported by 4 massive legs, each as thick as a tree trunk, each ending in broad, padded feet that distributed its weight across the soft ground, preventing it from sinking into the mud. Its front legs were longer than its hind legs, giving it a sloping back, a posture that was unique among sauropods, and this allowed it to reach even higher, to extend its neck to heights of 12 or 13 meters to feed on the uppermost branches of the tallest trees. The neck of Brachiosaurus was a marvel of engineering, a structure that defied the normal constraints of vertebrate anatomy. It contained 13 cervical vertebrae, each hollowed out by air sacs, each connected to the neck by ball and socket joints that allowed flexibility, that allowed the neck to move in multiple directions, to sweep through the canopy like a living arm. The vertebrae were reinforced by bony struts, by ligaments that ran the length of the neck, supporting the weight, preventing collapse, and the muscles that controlled the neck were massive, anchored to the shoulders, to the back, to the base of the skull. The neck itself weighed several tons, and lifting it, moving it, holding it upright required an enormous expenditure of energy, required a cardiovascular system that was unlike anything in the modern world. The heart of Brachiosaurus was enormous, perhaps weighing 400 kilograms, beating slowly, powerfully, pumping blood upward through arteries as thick as your thigh, generating pressures that exceeded 300 millimeters of mercury, pressures that would cause hemorrhaging in a human, that would rupture blood vessels, that would kill within minutes. But Brachiosaurus had evolved adaptations to handle these pressures, including thick-walled arteries, valves that prevented backflow, and possibly a series of smaller hearts or pumping stations along the neck, though this is speculative, debated, unproven. The blood itself was rich in hemoglobin, capable of carrying large amounts of oxygen, and the lungs were vast, filling much of the body cavity, connected to air sacs that extended into the bones, into the neck, into the tail, creating a respiratory system that was efficient, that was powerful, that could sustain a body that weighed as much as 10 elephants. Diplodocus was longer than Brachiosaurus, but lighter, more gracile, built for a different feeding strategy. It lived in the same time period, the late Jurassic, in what is now the western United States, in floodplains and river valleys where herds of these giants moved slowly through the landscape, stripping vegetation, leaving behind trails of trampled earth and broken branches. Diplodocus was 25 to 30 meters long from nose to tail, but it weighed only 10 to 20 tons, much lighter than Brachiosaurus, and this was because its bones were even more pneumatized, even more hollowed out, even lighter. Its neck was long but held horizontally, parallel to the ground, and its tail was even longer, a whip-like structure that could be swung with tremendous force, that could produce a sonic boom, a crack like thunder, when snapped through the air. The tail of Diplodocus was a weapon, a tool, a means of communication. It contained over 80 caudal vertebrae, each smaller than the last, tapering to a thin, flexible tip, and the muscles that controlled the tail were powerful, capable of accelerating the tip to supersonic speeds, creating a shock wave, a sound that could be heard for kilometers, that could warn predators, that could signal to other members of the herd, that could establish dominance, territory, presence. The tail could also be used defensively, swung at attacking theropods, striking with enough force to break bones, to deter predators. To protect the herd, and the sound it made, the crack of the whip, was a signature of the Jurassic, a sound that echoed across the floodplains, across the forests, a sound that is now silent, lost to time, preserved only in the fossils in the bones that tell the story. The feeding strategy of Diplodocus was different from that of Brachiosaurus. While Brachiosaurus browsed high in the canopy, Diplodocus fed lower, sweeping its neck from side to side, using its peg-like teeth to strip leaves from branches, to rake vegetation into its mouth, swallowing it whole, without chewing, without processing. The teeth of Diplodocus were simple, cylindrical, arranged in a row at the front of the jaws, and they were replaced continuously throughout its life, with new teeth growing in to replace those that were worn down, broken, lost. Diplodocus did not chew its food. Instead, it swallowed stones, gastroliths, but ground together in its gizzard, mechanically breaking down the plant material, aiding digestion, extracting nutrients from the tough fibrous vegetation. Apatosaurus, once known as Brontosaurus, was another giant of the late Jurassic, living alongside Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus in the Morrison Formation, a vast expanse of floodplains and river systems that stretched across western North America. Apatosaurus was 21 to 23 meters long, weighing between 20 and 30 tons, and it was more robust than Diplodocus, more heavily built, with a shorter neck and a more massive body. Its legs were thick, pillar-like, supporting the enormous weight, and its feet left footprints that were over a meter across, deep impressions in the mud that fossilized, that have been found in trackways and sequences that show the animal walking, moving, migrating across the landscape. The social behavior of sauropods is inferred from trackways, from bone beds, from the distribution of fossils, and the evidence suggests that many species lived in herds, moving together, feeding together, protecting their young together. Trackways show groups of sauropods walking in the same direction, with smaller individuals in the center, larger individuals on the outside, a formation that suggests protection, that suggests social structure, that suggests care for the vulnerable. Bone beds, where multiple individuals of the same species are found together, suggest that herds died together, perhaps in droughts, perhaps in floods, perhaps in mass strandings, and these assemblages provide snapshots of social groups, of families, of communities that lived and died together. The nesting behavior of sauropods has been revealed by the discovery of nesting sites, of clutches of eggs arranged in patterns, of embryos preserved inside eggs, of hatchlings that died shortly after birth. Sauropods laid their eggs in nests, in shallow depressions scraped into the ground, and they covered them with vegetation, with sand, with soil, allowing the heat of decomposition, the heat of the sun, to incubate the eggs to bring them to the temperature needed for development. The eggs were large, the size of footballs, with thick shells, and they were laid in clutches of 20 or 30, ensuring that at least some would survive, that at least some would hatch, that the species would continue. The hatchlings were tiny, weighing only a few kilograms, vulnerable, defenseless, and they grew rapidly, doubling in size every few months, reaching sexual maturity in 10 or 15 years, continuing to grow throughout their lives. Though the rate slowed as they aged, the growth rings in sauropod bones, like the rings in trees, recalled the passage of years, the cycles of growth and rest, and they reveal that some individuals lived for 70 or 80 years, perhaps longer, reaching sizes that are almost incomprehensible, weights that strain the limits of what bone and muscle can support. Argentinosaurus was the largest of all sauropods, the largest land animal that ever lived, a creature so massive that its very existence challenges our understanding of biology, of physics, of what is possible. It lived in the late Cretaceous, around 90 to 5 million years ago, in what is now Argentina, in a world that was warmer, wetter, more tropical than the Jurassic, and it weighed perhaps 70 to 100 tons, perhaps more, with estimates varying depending on the method of calculation, on the assumptions made about body density, about muscle mass, about the distribution of weight. Argentinosaurus was 30 to 35 meters long, with a neck that extended 10 meters, a body that was as wide as a bus, legs that were taller than a human, and feet that left craters in the ground, depressions that filled with water, that became pools that supported ecosystems of their own. The metabolism of such a giant is difficult to imagine, difficult to calculate. Argentinosaurus would have needed to consume hundreds of kilograms of vegetation every day, stripping entire groves of trees, moving constantly, feeding constantly, converting plant matter into the energy needed to sustain a body that was larger than any other land animal before or since. Its digestive system was a vast fermentation chamber, filled with bacteria and microorganisms that broke down cellulose, that produced heat, that produced gases, and the animal itself was a walking ecosystem, a habitat for countless smaller organisms, for parasites, for symbionts, for scavengers that fed on its dung, on its dead skin, on the insects that swarmed around it. The footsteps of Argentinosaurus shook the earth, literally, measurably, creating vibrations that travelled through the ground, that could be felt by other animals, that announced its presence, its approach, its passage. When a herd of Argentinosaurus moved through the landscape, the sound was like distant thunder, a low rumbling roar that built and faded, that echoed through the valleys, through the forests, a sound that is now lost, now silent, now preserved only in the imagination, in the reconstructions, in the attempts to understand what it was like, what it sounded like, what it felt like to live in a world dominated by giants. The sauropods were not invulnerable. They were preyed upon by large theropods, by Allosaurus in the Jurassic, by Carcharodontosaurus and Giganotosaurus in the Cretaceous, by predators that hunted in packs, that targeted the young, the old, the sick, the isolated. But the adults, the full-grown giants, were largely safe, protected by their size, by their strength, by the simple fact that there was no predator large enough, strong enough to bring them down. They lived in a world of abundance, of endless vegetation, of warm climates and shallow seas, and they thrived. They multiplied, they spread across the globe, and for over 100 million years they were the dominant herbivores, the architects of the landscape, the gentle giants whose rhythmic heartbeat was the pulse of the Mesozoic world. And in the quiet of this moment, you can imagine them moving slowly through the forest, their necks swaying, their tails sweeping, their footsteps echoing, their breath rising in clouds of vapor, their eyes blinking slowly, patiently as they feed, as they rest, as they live out their long, slow lives in a world that is gone, a world that exists now only in stone, in fossils, in the silent testimony of bones that speak of giants, of time, of the deep, patient rhythm of life on Earth. The first feathers did not grow for flight, they grew for warmth, for display, for the soft rustle of courtship in the shadows of the Jurassic forest, and only later, much later, did they catch the air, did they lift their bearers skyward, did they transform the descendants of dinosaurs into the birds that fill the modern world with song. The discovery that many dinosaurs were feathered has revolutionized our understanding of the Mesozoic, has transformed the image of dinosaurs from scaly, reptilian monsters into creatures that were warm, dynamic, covered in plumage that ranged from simple filaments to complex asymmetric flight feathers. The evidence comes from fossils preserved in fine-grained sediments, in lake beds and lagoons where the conditions were perfect for preservation, where the soft tissues, the feathers, the skin, the internal organs were buried quickly, were protected from decay, were mineralized over millions of years into stone that retains the ghostly imprint of what once was. Archaeopteryx is the most famous of the feathered dinosaurs, the transitional form that bridges the gap between non-avian dinosaurs and modern birds. It lived in the late Jurassic, around 150 million years ago, in what is now Germany, in an archipelago of tropical islands surrounded by shallow lagoons, where the water was warm, clear, rich with life. Archaeopteryx was the size of a raven, weighing perhaps 1 kilogram, with a body that was unmistakably dinosaurian, a long bony tail, teeth in its jaws, clawed fingers on its wings, but also unmistakably avian, with flight feathers, with wings, with the ability to fly, or at least to glide, to move through the air in ways that no other dinosaur could. The feathers of Archaeopteryx were asymmetric, with the leading edge narrower than the trailing edge, a structure that is characteristic of flight feathers, that generates lift, that allows controlled flight. The wings were formed by elongated arm bones and fingers, with feathers attached to the bones, to the skin, creating a surface that could catch the air, that could generate thrust, that could propel the animal forward, upward, through the canopy. The tail was long, with feathers arranged in pairs along its length, forming a fan that could be spread for stability, for steering, for control during flight. Archaeopteryx also had feathers on its legs, on its body, covering it in a coat of plumage that would have been colourful, patterned, used for display, for camouflage, for thermoregulation. The lifestyle of Archaeopteryx is debated. Some paleontologists believe it was primarily a ground-dwelling animal, running through the undergrowth, using its wings to assist in leaping, in climbing, in escaping predators. Others believe it was arboreal, living in trees, gliding from branch to branch, using its claws to grip bark, to climb trunks, to navigate the three-dimensional world of the forest canopy. Still others believe it was capable of powered flight, of flapping its wings, of generating enough lift to take off from the ground, to fly for short distances, to hunt insects, to escape danger. The truth is probably somewhere in between, a creature that was experimenting with flight, that was learning to use its wings, that was in the process of evolving from a ground-dwelling dinosaur into a flying bird. The brain of Archaeopteryx was relatively large, with well-developed regions for vision, for balance, for coordination, suggesting that it had the neural architecture needed for flight, for processing the complex sensory information required to navigate through the air, to judge distances, to control wing movements, to land safely. The inner ear of Archaeopteryx, preserved in some specimens, shows structures similar to those of modern birds, structures involved in detecting acceleration, in maintaining balance, in sensing orientation, further supporting the idea that it was capable of at least some form of aerial locomotion. Microraptor was a small dromaeosaurid, a member of the raptor family, living in the early Cretaceous of China, around 120 million years ago, in a world of lakes and forests, of volcanic ash and seasonal floods. Microraptor was remarkable because it had 4 wings, with flight feathers on its arms and on its legs, creating a biplane-like configuration that is unique among known animals. It was less than a metre long, weighing perhaps 1 kilogram, and it was covered in iridescent black feathers, feathers that shimmered in the light, that reflected blue and green, that were used for display, for attracting mates, for signalling to rivals. The 4-winged configuration of Microraptor suggests that it was a glider, launching itself from trees, spreading its limbs, catching the air, soaring from branch to branch, from tree to tree, covering distances of tens of meters in a single glide. The feathers on its legs would have created drag, would have slowed its descent, would have allowed it to control its trajectory, to steer, to land precisely on a chosen branch. Microraptor was a predator, feeding on small vertebrates, on fish, on insects, and it hunted from the air, diving down, snatching prey with its clawed hands, with its toothed jaws, and then returning to the trees, to the safety of the canopy, to feed, to rest, to sleep. The colour of Microraptor's feathers has been determined by analysing the melanosomes, the pigment-containing structures within the fossilised feathers, and comparing them to the melanosomes in modern bird feathers. The shape and arrangement of the melanosomes indicate that Microraptor's feathers were black with a metallic sheen, similar to the feathers of crows and starlings. And this suggests that colour, that iridescence, that visual display were important in the lives of these animals, were used for communication, for courtship, for establishing dominance, for navigating the complex social world of the Mesozoic. The hunting strategy of Microraptor has been inferred from its anatomy, from the shape of its teeth, from the structure of its claws, from the presence of fish scales in the stomach cavity of one specimen. Microraptor, likely hunted by perching in trees near water, watching for fish, for amphibians, for small animals coming to drink, and then launching itself, gliding down, snatching the prey with its feet, with its hands, and carrying it back to the trees. This strategy, similar to that of modern ospreys and kingfishers, would have been effective, would have allowed Microraptor to exploit a niche that other predators could not, to survive in an environment that was competitive, that was dangerous, that required specialization. Velociraptor, made famous by popular culture, was also feathered, though it could not fly, could not glide, could not leave the ground. It lived in the late Cretaceous of Mongolia, around 75 million years ago, in a desert environment, in sand dunes and dry lake beds, where water was scarce, where temperatures were extreme, where survival required speed, intelligence, adaptability. Velociraptor was 2 meters long, weighing around 15 kilograms, and it was a predator, hunting small dinosaurs, mammals, lizards, using its speed, its agility, its sickle-shaped claws to kill, to feed, to survive. The feathers of Velociraptor were not for flight, but for insulation, for display, for thermoregulation. They covered its body, its arms, its tail, creating a coat that kept it warm during the cold desert nights, that kept it cool during the hot desert days, that allowed it to maintain a stable body temperature, to remain active, to hunt, to move, to live in an environment that was harsh, unforgiving, deadly. The feathers on its arms were long, forming wing-like structures that could be spread for balance, for display, for intimidation. And when Velociraptor ran, its arms were held out to the sides, its feathers streaming behind, creating a silhouette that was both beautiful and terrifying. The intelligence of Velociraptor is often exaggerated, but it was indeed a smart animal, with a brain that was large relative to its body size, with keen senses, with the ability to learn, to adapt, to solve problems. Its eyes were large, forward-facing, giving it binocular vision, depth perception, the ability to judge distances, to track moving prey, to coordinate attacks. Its sense of smell was acute, allowing it to detect prey from a distance, to follow trails, to locate carcasses. Its hearing was sensitive, tuned to the high-frequency sounds of small animals, of rustling leaves, of footsteps in the sand. Velociraptor was a formidable predator, not because of its size, not because of its strength, but because of its intelligence, its speed, its adaptability. The famous fighting dinosaurs fossil, discovered in Mongolia, shows a velociraptor locked in combat with a protoceratops, frozen in time, preserved in the moment of death. The velociraptor's sickle claw is embedded in the throat of the protoceratops, while the protoceratops's beak is clamped around the arm of the velociraptor, and both animals are entangled, struggling, dying together. This fossil provides a snapshot of predator-prey interaction, of the violence, the desperation, the struggle for survival that defined the Mesozoic, and it shows that Velociraptor was a capable predator, willing to take on prey that was larger, stronger, more dangerous than itself. Yutyrannus was a large tyrannosauroid living in the early Cretaceous of China around 125 million years ago, in a temperate climate, in forests and floodplains where the winters were cold, where snow fell, where temperatures dropped below freezing. Yutyrannus was 9 meters long, weighing around 1.5 tons, and it was covered in feathers, in long filamentous plumage that covered its body, its legs, its tail, providing insulation, providing warmth, allowing it to remain active during the cold months, during the times when other animals were dormant, or hibernating, or struggling to survive. The discovery of Yutyrannus was significant because it demonstrated that even large theropods, even animals that weighed over a ton, could be feathered, could be covered in plumage, challenging the assumption that feathers were only found on small dinosaurs. On animals that needed insulation because of their small size, their high surface area to volume ratio, Yutyrannus shows that feathers served multiple functions, that they were not just for flight, not just for warmth, but also for display, for camouflage, for communication, and that they were present across a wide range of dinosaur species, across a wide range of sizes, across a wide range of environments. The feathers of Yutyrannus were simple, filamentous, lacking the complex structure of flight feathers, but they were effective. They were functional. They provided the insulation needed to survive in a cold climate, to hunt during the winter, to remain active when other predators were not. Yutyrannus was an apex predator, hunting the herbivorous dinosaurs of its time, using its size, its strength, its feathered body to survive, to thrive, to dominate the landscape. The question of whether Tyrannosaurus rex, the most famous of all dinosaurs, was feathered, remains controversial. Tyrannosaurus lived in a warmer climate than Yutyrannus in the late Cretaceous of North America, and it was much larger, weighing up to 9 tons, and large animals in warm climates tend to have problems with overheating, not with staying warm. Skin impressions from Tyrannosaurus show scales, not feathers, on parts of the body, but these impressions are limited, covering only small areas, and it is possible that Tyrannosaurus had feathers on other parts of its body, on its back, on its neck, on its tail, or that it had feathers as a juvenile and lost them as it grew, as its body size increased, as its need for insulation decreased. The evolution of feathers is a story of gradual change, of incremental steps, of structures that evolved for one purpose and were later co-opted for another. The earliest feathers were simple filaments, hair-like structures that provided insulation, that kept the animal warm, and these evolved into more complex structures, into branched filaments, into tufts, into plumes, and eventually into the asymmetric flight feathers that allowed powered flight, that allowed the conquest of the air, that allowed the evolution of birds. The colours of dinosaur feathers, inferred from melanosomes. From the structure of the feathers themselves, ranged from black and brown to red and orange, to iridescent blues and greens, to patterns of stripes and spots, of bands and bars, creating a visual landscape that was rich, diverse, vibrant. The Mesozoic world was not a world of drab grey reptiles, but a world of colour, of display, of visual communication, of animals that used their appearance to attract mates, to warn rivals, to blend into the environment, to survive. Sinosauropteryx, one of the first feathered dinosaurs discovered, lived in the early Cretaceous of China, and analysis of its fossilized feathers revealed that it had a reddish-brown coloration with a striped tail, a pattern similar to that of modern red pandas, suggesting that it used its coloration for camouflage, for blending into the dappled light of the forest floor, for avoiding predators, for stalking prey. The discovery of colour in dinosaur feathers has opened a new window into the Mesozoic, has allowed us to see these animals not just as skeletons, not just as bones, but as living, breathing, colourful creatures that inhabited a world that was as visually complex, as visually rich, as the world we know today. And as you rest, as you drift, you can imagine the forests of the Cretaceous, filled with the soft rustle of feathers, with the calls of protobirds, with a flash of iridescent plumage in the dappled sunlight, with creatures that were neither fully dinosaur nor fully bird, but something in between, something transitional, something beautiful, moving through a world that was warm, alive, filled with the soft echoes of evolution, the quiet transformation of scales into feathers, of earth into sky, of the past into the future. In the deep silence of the Mesozoic forest, where shadows pooled beneath ancient conifers and the air hung thick with moisture, the apex predators waited, motionless, patient, their eyes tracking movement, their bodies coiled like springs, their breath slow and measured, conserving energy for the explosive moment of the hunt. The theropods were the dominant predators of the Mesozoic, ranging in size from chicken-sized hunters to giants that weighed as much as elephants. And they occupied every terrestrial ecosystem, every niche, every environment where prey could be found. They were bipedal, walking on their hind legs, their bodies balanced by long muscular tails, their arms free to grasp, to manipulate, to hold struggling prey. Their skulls were built for biting, with powerful jaw muscles, with teeth designed for different purposes, slicing, tearing, crushing, holding, and their senses were acute, finely tuned, to detect the slightest movement, the faintest sound, the subtlest scent. Allosaurus was the apex predator of the late Jurassic, living around 150 million years ago in what is now North America, in the Morrison Formation, the same landscape inhabited by Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, and Stegosaurus. Allosaurus was 8 to 9 meters long, weighing around 2 tons, and it was built for power, for strength, for delivering devastating attacks. Its skull was large, nearly a meter long, with jaws that could open wide, that could gape to 90 degrees, and its teeth were serrated, blade-like, designed to slice through flesh, to cut through muscle, to sever blood vessels, causing massive hemorrhaging, causing shock, causing death. The hunting strategy of Allosaurus has been inferred from its anatomy, from the structure of its skull, from the strength of its neck muscles, from the wear patterns on its teeth. Allosaurus likely hunted by ambush, waiting in cover, watching for prey to approach, and then charging, accelerating to speeds of perhaps 30 kilometers per hour, closing the distance in seconds, and delivering a powerful bite to the neck, to the flank, to the spine. The bite was not meant to crush bones, not meant to hold on, but to slash, to cut, to wound, and then Allosaurus would retreat, would back away, would wait for the prey to weaken, to bleed out, to collapse, and only then would it approach again. Would it feed? Would it tear away chunks of meat? Would it consume the kill? The skull of Allosaurus was surprisingly light, surprisingly fragile, with large openings, with thin bones, with air spaces that reduced weight, that allowed for a larger skull without the corresponding increase in mass. This lightness came at a cost. The skull could not withstand the forces of a crushing bite, could not handle the stresses of holding on to struggling prey, and this is why Allosaurus used a slash and retreat strategy, why it relied on cutting rather than crushing, why it was a bleeder rather than a bone breaker. The neck muscles of Allosaurus were powerful, capable of driving the skull downward with tremendous force, and the upper jaw was reinforced, strengthened, able to absorb the impact of the strike, able to deliver the slashing bite that was its signature attack. The social behavior of Allosaurus is uncertain, but there is evidence that they may have hunted in groups, may have cooperated to bring down large prey, may have shared kills. Trackways show multiple Allosaurus moving in the same direction, and bone beds contain multiple individuals of different ages, suggesting that they congregated, that they tolerated each other, that they may have formed loose social groups. However, there is also evidence of cannibalism, of Allosaurus feeding on other Allosaurus, and this suggests that social bonds were weak, that competition was intense, that survival was paramount, that even members of the same species were potential prey. Tyrannosaurus rex is the most famous dinosaur, the icon of the Mesozoic, the apex predator of the late Cretaceous, living around 68 to 66 million years ago in what is now Western North America. Tyrannosaurus was 12 to 13 meters long, weighing between 8 and 9 tons, and it was the largest land predator of its time, the most powerful, the most formidable. Its skull was massive, 1.5 meters long, with jaws that could exert a bite force of over 50,000 newtons, the strongest bite of any land animal, capable of crushing bone, of pulverizing vertebrae, of biting through the armor of ceratopsians, of killing with a single bite. The teeth of Tyrannosaurus were thick, conical, banana-shaped, designed not for slicing but for crushing, for penetrating, for holding. They were the size of bananas, some reaching lengths of 30 centimeters including the root, and they were continuously replaced throughout the animal's life, with new teeth growing in to replace those that were broken, worn, or lost. The bite of Tyrannosaurus was devastating, capable of removing chunks of flesh weighing hundreds of kilograms, capable of breaking bones, of accessing marrow, of consuming every part of the carcass, leaving little behind. The arms of Tyrannosaurus were small, famously so, measuring only about 1 meter in length, but they were not vestigial, not useless. They were muscular, powerful, capable of lifting hundreds of kilograms, and they ended in two-fingered hands with sharp claws. The function of these arms is debated. Some paleontologists believe they were used to help the animal rise from a prone position, to push against the ground, to lever the massive body upright. Others believe they were used to hold prey, to grip struggling animals, to stabilize the carcass during feeding. Still others believe they were used in mating, to grasp the partner, to maintain position. Though this is speculative, difficult to test, impossible to prove. The senses of Tyrannosaurus were extraordinary, among the most acute of any dinosaur. Its sense of smell was exceptional, with olfactory bulbs that were large, well-developed, capable of detecting scents from kilometers away, capable of locating carcasses, of tracking prey, of navigating the landscape by scent alone. Its vision was excellent, with forward-facing eyes, with binocular vision, with the ability to see in color, to detect movement, to judge distances, with precision. Its hearing was sensitive, tuned to low-frequency sounds, to the rumble of footsteps, to the calls of other dinosaurs, to the sounds of the forest, the plains, the rivers. The question of whether Tyrannosaurus was primarily a predator or a scavenger has been debated for decades. The evidence suggests that it was both, that it was an opportunistic feeder, taking whatever food was available, killing when it could, scavenging when it could not. The powerful bite, the robust teeth, the forward-facing eyes all suggest an active predator, an animal capable of killing large, dangerous prey. But the exceptional sense of smell, the ability to detect carcasses from great distances, suggests a scavenger, an animal that could locate and consume carrion, that could exploit the kills of other predators, that could survive by eating the dead. The truth is that Tyrannosaurus, like most large predators, was probably both, a facultative scavenger, a predator when opportunity arose, a scavenger when it did not. Spinosaurus was one of the largest theropods, possibly the largest, living in the mid-Cretaceous of North Africa, around 95 million years ago, in a landscape of rivers, deltas, and coastal swamps. Spinosaurus was 15 to 16 meters long, weighing between 6 and 7 tons, and it was unlike any other theropod, with a long crocodile-like skull, with conical teeth designed for gripping fish, with a massive sail on its back, formed by elongated neural spines that extended upward from the vertebrae, creating a structure that was over 1.5 meters tall. The lifestyle of Spinosaurus has been the subject of intense debate and revision. For decades, it was reconstructed as a terrestrial predator, similar to other large theropods. But recent discoveries have revealed that Spinosaurus was semi-aquatic, spending much of its time in water, hunting fish, crocodiles, and other aquatic prey. Its skull was long and narrow, with nostrils positioned far back, allowing it to breathe while partially submerged. Its teeth were conical, smooth, designed for gripping slippery prey, for holding fish, for preventing escape. Its bones were dense, solid, lacking the air spaces found in other theropods, providing ballast, allowing it to submerge, to dive, to swim. The limbs of Spinosaurus were short, particularly the hind limbs, and the feet were large, possibly webbed, adapted for paddling, for propulsion through water. The tail was long, flexible, with tall neural spines forming a fin-like structure, and recent studies suggest that Spinosaurus used its tail for swimming, for propelling itself through the water, for hunting in rivers and lakes, for exploiting an ecological niche that no other large theropod occupied. The sail on its back may have served multiple functions: thermoregulation, helping to absorb or dissipate heat, display used to attract mates or intimidate rivals, or species recognition, allowing individuals to identify each other from a distance. Giganotosaurus was another giant theropod, living in the late Cretaceous of South America, around 97 million years ago, in what is now Argentina. Giganotosaurus was 12 to 13 meters long, weighing around 8 tons, slightly larger than Tyrannosaurus, and it was the apex predator of its ecosystem, hunting the giant sauropods that still roam South America, including Argentinosaurus, the largest land animal that ever lived. The skull of Giganotosaurus was long, narrow, with teeth that were blade-like, serrated, designed for slicing, for cutting, for inflicting deep wounds, and its jaws were built for speed, for rapid biting, for delivering multiple strikes in quick succession. The hunting strategy of Giganotosaurus, when targeting giant sauropods, likely involved pack hunting, coordinated attacks, multiple individuals working together to bring down prey that was far larger than any single predator could handle alone. Evidence for this comes from the discovery of multiple Giganotosaurus individuals found together, suggesting social behavior, suggesting cooperation, suggesting that these predators, like modern wolves, hunted in groups, used strategy, used teamwork to overcome prey that would otherwise be invulnerable. The attack would have been brutal, coordinated with multiple predators striking simultaneously, biting the legs, the flanks, the neck, causing massive blood loss, causing shock, causing the giant to stumble, to fall, to become vulnerable. Carcharodontosaurus was a close relative of Giganotosaurus, living in the mid-Cretaceous of North Africa, in the same time and place as Spinosaurus, and the two predators likely competed for resources, likely encountered each other, likely clashed over territory, over kills, over dominance. Carcharodontosaurus was 12 to 13 meters long, weighing around 6 to 8 tons, and its name means shark-toothed lizard, a reference to its teeth, which were similar in shape to those of great white sharks, serrated, triangular, designed for cutting through flesh, for slicing through muscle, for inflicting devastating wounds. The coexistence of Spinosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus in the same ecosystem suggests niche partitioning, suggests that the two predators exploited different resources, hunted different habitats. Spinosaurus was semi-aquatic, hunting fish and aquatic animals, while Carcharodontosaurus was terrestrial, hunting land-dwelling dinosaurs. And this separation would have reduced competition, would have allowed both predators to coexist, to thrive, to dominate their respective niches. Carnotaurus was a medium-sized theropod, living in the late Cretaceous of South America, around 70 million years ago, in what is now Argentina. Carnotaurus was 7 to 8 meters long, weighing around 1.5 tons, and it was remarkable for its unusual features: a short, deep skull with two prominent horns above the eyes, tiny arms that were even smaller than those of Tyrannosaurus, and a slender, lightweight build that suggested speed, agility, pursuit hunting. The horns of Carnotaurus were likely used for display, for intraspecific combat, for establishing dominance, for attracting mates, and they may have been brightly coloured, covered in keratin sheaths that enhanced their size, their visibility, their impact. The skin of Carnotaurus has been preserved in some specimens, showing scales, bumps, and other textures, providing a rare glimpse into the external appearance of a theropod. The scales were small, non-overlapping, arranged in patterns, and they varied in size and shape across different parts of the body, creating a texture that was complex, that was varied, that was unlike the smooth, uniform skin often depicted in reconstructions. The preservation of skin impressions is rare, requiring exceptional conditions, rapid burial, fine-grained sediments, and the Carnotaurus specimens provide invaluable information about the appearance, the texture, the external anatomy of theropods. The The predators of the Mesozoic were not mindless killing machines, not simple brutes, but sophisticated hunters with complex behaviors, with acute senses, with strategies adapted to their prey, to their environment, to their ecological niche. They were patient, waiting for the right moment, conserving energy, striking with precision, with power, with the accumulated force of millions of years of evolution. They were the apex of their ecosystems, the top of the food chain, the ultimate expression of predatory adaptation, and they ruled the Mesozoic world for over 160 million years. A reign that ended only with the asteroid impact, with the mass extinction, with the sudden, catastrophic end of the age of dinosaurs. And as you rest, as you breathe slowly, deeply, you can imagine them, standing in the shadows, their eyes gleaming, their bodies still, their breath quiet, waiting, watching, patient, the apex predators of a world that is gone, a world preserved in stone, in fossils, in the silent testimony of bones that speak of power, of patience, of the stillness of the hunter. The measured breath of the predator, the quiet moment before the strike, beneath the surface of the Mesozoic seas, where sunlight filtered through warm, shallow waters in shimmering columns of blue and green, where the silence was broken only by the distant calls of creatures that had never known land. The marine reptiles glided, weightless, graceful, masters of an alien world that covered most of the planet. The oceans of the Mesozoic were vast, warm, teeming with life, and they were dominated not by dinosaurs, which never truly conquered the marine realm, but by other reptiles, by lineages that had returned to the sea, that had abandoned the land their ancestors had fought so hard to colonize, that had evolved flippers for legs, streamlined bodies for swimming, adaptations for diving, for hunting, for breathing at the surface, for giving birth in the open ocean. These were the ichthyosaurs, the plesiosaurs, the mosasaurs, the marine crocodiles, and they ruled the seas for over 180 million years, a reign longer than that of the dinosaurs on land. Ichthyosaurs were the most fish-like of the marine reptiles, so convergent with modern dolphins and sharks that their body plan, their shape, their adaptations were almost identical. A stunning example of convergent evolution, of different lineages arriving at the same solutions to the same problems. The earliest ichthyosaurs appeared in the early Triassic, just a few million years after the Permian-Triassic extinction, and they evolved rapidly, diversifying, spreading across the world's oceans, occupying every marine niche from shallow coastal waters to the deep open ocean. Ophthalmosaurus was a late Jurassic ichthyosaur, living around 160 million years ago, in the seas that covered what is now Europe and North America. It was 4 to 5 meters long, weighing around 1 ton, and it was built for speed, for endurance, for deep diving. Its body was streamlined, torpedo-shaped, with a dorsal fin, a crescent-shaped tail fin, and 4 flippers that were used for steering, for maneuvering, for precise control. Its eyes were enormous, the largest eyes relative to body size of any vertebrate, measuring up to 23 centimeters in diameter, and they were adapted for vision in low light, for hunting in the deep ocean, for detecting the bioluminescent flashes of prey in the darkness far below the surface. The eyes of Ophthalmosaurus were supported by a ring of bony plates, the sclerotic ring that protected the eye from the pressure of deep dives, that maintained the shape of the eyeball, that prevented collapse at depths where the pressure was immense, crushing, deadly to animals not adapted to it. Ophthalmosaurus could dive to depths of several hundred meters, perhaps deeper, holding its breath for extended periods, hunting squid, fish, and other cephalopods in the twilight zone, in the realm where sunlight faded, where the water was cold, where the pressure was intense, where few other predators could follow. The reproduction of ichthyosaurs was viviparous, meaning they gave birth to live young, a necessary adaptation for a fully aquatic lifestyle, for animals that could not return to land, that could not lay eggs on beaches, that had to complete their entire life cycle in the ocean. Fossils of pregnant ichthyosaurs have been found, with embryos preserved inside the body cavity, and some fossils show females in the act of giving birth, with the infant emerging tail first, a position that prevented drowning that allowed the newborn to remain underwater until fully delivered, until it could swim to the surface, until it could take its first breath. Shonisaurus was one of the largest ichthyosaurs, one of the largest marine reptiles that ever lived, reaching lengths of up to 21 meters, rivaling modern sperm whales in size. It lived in the late Triassic, around 215 million years ago, in the deep ocean, in the open water far from shore, and it fed on soft-bodied prey, on squid, on fish, using suction feeding, drawing prey into its mouth with powerful inhalations, swallowing them whole. Shonisaurus had a long, narrow snout, with small teeth or no teeth at all in adults, and its body was massive, robust, built for endurance, for long-distance swimming, for crossing ocean basins, for migrating between feeding grounds, between breeding areas, between the warm tropical waters and the cooler temperate seas. The decline of ichthyosaurs began in the early Cretaceous, and by the late Cretaceous they were extinct, disappearing tens of millions of years before the end Cretaceous mass extinction that killed the dinosaurs. The reasons for their decline are unclear, but it may have been related to competition with other marine predators, with the rise of the mosasaurs, with changes in ocean chemistry, with the loss of prey species, with the shifting of ocean currents, with the breakup of continents, with the opening and closing of seaways that altered migration routes. That changed ecosystems. That disrupted the delicate balance of marine life. Plesiosaurs were another major group of marine reptiles, and they were divided into two distinct body plans: the long-necked plesiosaurs with small heads and elongated necks, and the short-necked plesiosaurs with massive heads and powerful jaws. Both groups had 4 large flippers, and they swam by flapping these flippers in a flying motion, like underwater birds, like penguins, like sea turtles, generating thrust, generating lift, propelling themselves through the water with grace, with power, with efficiency. Elasmosaurus was one of the longest-necked plesiosaurs, living in the late Cretaceous of North America, around 80 million years ago, in the western interior seaway, a vast shallow sea that split the continent in half, connecting the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. Elasmosaurus was 10 to 14 meters long, with a neck that contained 72 vertebrae, more than any other known animal. And this neck made up more than half of its total body length. The neck was flexible, capable of moving in multiple directions, of sweeping through schools of fish, of darting forward to snatch prey, of reaching into crevices, into hiding places, into areas that other predators could not access. The function of the long neck in Elasmosaurus has been debated. Some paleontologists believe it was used for ambush hunting, with the body remaining still, hidden, while the neck extended upward, toward the surface towards schools of fish, striking suddenly, unexpectedly, from below. Others believe it was used for bottom feeding, for probing the seafloor, for searching for prey in the sediment, for capturing fish, crustaceans, mollusks that lived on or near the bottom. Still others believe it was used for surface feeding, for skimming the water, for catching fish that swam near the surface, for exploiting a niche that other predators could not, for surviving in an environment that was competitive, that was crowded, that required specialization. The flippers of Elasmosaurus were large, powerful, paddle-shaped, and they were used for propulsion, for steering, for maneuvering. The front flippers were larger than the rear flippers, and they provided most of the thrust, most of the power, while the rear flippers were used for stability, for control, for fine adjustments. The swimming motion was a figure 8 pattern, with the flippers moving in coordinated strokes, generating vortices, generating lift, propelling the animal forward with smooth, efficient movements, with minimal energy expenditure, with the grace of a bird in flight. Kronosaurus was a massive pliosaur living in the early Cretaceous of Australia around 120 million years ago. In the shallow seas that covered much of the continent, Kronosaurus was 9 to 10 meters long, with a skull that was nearly 3 meters in length, and it was one of the largest predators of its time, hunting large fish, sharks, other marine reptiles, and even smaller plesiosaurs. Its jaws were lined with conical teeth, some reaching lengths of 30 centimeters, and they were designed for gripping, for holding, for crushing, for delivering a bite that was powerful, devastating, lethal. The bite force of Kronosaurus has been estimated at over 40,000 newtons, comparable to that of Tyrannosaurus rex, and it was capable of crushing bone, of biting through armor, of killing with a single strike. The skull was massive, robust, heavily built, with powerful jaw muscles, with reinforced bones, with adaptations for withstanding the stresses of biting large, struggling prey. Kronosaurus was an ambush predator, likely lurking in the depths, in the murky water, waiting for prey to pass overhead, and then surging upward, accelerating, closing the distance in seconds, and delivering a bite that ended the hunt, that secured the kill, that provided food for days. Mosasaurs were the last great group of marine reptiles to evolve, appearing in the mid-Cretaceous and rapidly diversifying, spreading across the world's oceans, becoming the dominant marine predators of the late Cretaceous. Mosasaurs were related to modern monitor lizards and snakes, and they evolved from terrestrial ancestors, from lizards that lived on land, that hunted along the shores, that gradually adapted to an aquatic lifestyle, that evolved flippers, streamlined bodies, powerful tails, and the ability to hunt in the open ocean. Mosasaurus was one of the largest mosasaurs living in the late Cretaceous around 70 to 66 million years ago in the seas of Europe, North America, and North Africa. Mosasaurus was 12 to 18 meters long, weighing up to 15 tons, and it was the apex predator of its ecosystem, hunting fish, sharks, sea turtles, other mosasaurs, and even plesiosaurs. Its skull was large, elongated, with powerful jaws lined with sharp, recurved teeth, and it had a double-hinged jaw, similar to that of modern snakes, that allowed it to swallow large prey whole, to consume animals that were nearly as large as itself. The tail of Mosasaurus was long, powerful, with a vertical fluke at the end, similar to that of sharks, and it was used for propulsion, for generating thrust, for accelerating, for pursuing prey. The body was streamlined, hydrodynamic, designed for speed, for efficiency, for cutting through the water with minimal resistance. The limbs were modified into flippers, with elongated digits, with webbing, with adaptations for steering, for maneuvering, for precise control, and the animal swam with lateral undulations of the body and tail, with powerful strokes that propelled it forward, that allowed it to chase down fast-moving prey, that made it one of the most formidable predators of the Mesozoic seas. The diet of Mosasaurus was varied, opportunistic, including anything it could catch, anything it could overpower, anything it could swallow. Stomach contents and bite marks on fossils show that Mosasaurus fed on fish, on ammonites, on sea turtles, on plesiosaurs, on other mosasaurs, and even on seabirds, on pterosaurs that ventured too close to the water, that landed on the surface, that became prey to the predator lurking below. Mosasaurus was an apex predator, a generalist, an animal that exploited every available food source, that dominated the late Cretaceous seas, that ruled the oceans until the asteroid impact, until the mass extinction, until the end of the Mesozoic. Tylosaurus was another large mosasaur, closely related to Mosasaurus, living in the western interior seaway of North America during the late Cretaceous. Tylosaurus was 12 to 15 meters long and it had a distinctive elongated snout, a bony ram at the front of its skull that may have been used for stunning prey, for delivering blunt force trauma, for disorienting fish, for breaking the shells of ammonites, for fighting with rivals. Tylosaurus was a fast swimmer, a pursuit predator, chasing down prey in the open water, using its speed, its agility, its endurance to outlast, to outmaneuver, to capture animals that tried to flee. The marine reptiles of the Mesozoic were not dinosaurs, were not closely related to dinosaurs, but they shared the world with dinosaurs. They lived in the same time, they were part of the same ecosystems, and they were just as diverse, just as successful, just as remarkable. They evolved from terrestrial ancestors, from animals that lived on land, and they returned to the sea. They adapted to an aquatic lifestyle, they conquered the oceans, and they thrived for over 180 million years, a testament to the power of evolution, to the adaptability of life, to the endless forms most beautiful that have filled and continue to fill the planet. And as you drift, as you float, weightless, you can imagine the Mesozoic seas, warm, clear, filled with life, with ichthyosaurs gliding through the depths, with plesiosaurs sweeping their long necks through schools of fish, with mosasaurs patrolling the surface, with the silent majesty of creatures that moved through water as birds move through air, with grace, with power, with the effortless beauty of animals perfectly adapted to their element, to their world, to the weightless blue realm that covered most of the earth, that was home to some of the most extraordinary animals that ever lived. Above the Mesozoic world, where the air was thick and warm, where thermals rose from sun-baked plains and coastal cliffs, where the wind carried the scent of salt and ancient forests, the pterosaurs soared, silent, effortless, masters of the sky, the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, the architects of an aerial realm that would not be matched until the evolution of birds. Pterosaurs were not dinosaurs, though they lived alongside them, shared the same world, evolved from the same archosaur ancestors. They were a separate lineage, a unique experiment in flight, and they dominated the skies for over 160 million years, from the late Triassic to the end of the Cretaceous, evolving into forms that range from sparrow-sized insectivores to giants with wingspans that exceeded those of small aircraft. Creatures so large that their very existence challenges our understanding of the limits of flight, of what is possible for an animal that must lift itself into the air, that must remain aloft, that must navigate the three-dimensional world of wind and weather and gravity. The wings of pterosaurs were fundamentally different from those of birds or bats. They were formed by a membrane of skin, muscle, and other tissues that stretched from the body to the enormously elongated fourth finger, creating a surface that was flexible, controllable, capable of changing shape in flight, of adjusting to wind conditions, of generating lift, of providing propulsion. The other three fingers were small, clawed, used for gripping, for climbing, for manipulating objects. And the wing membrane itself was reinforced by fibers, by structural proteins that gave it strength, that prevented tearing, that allowed it to withstand the stresses of flight. Dimorphodon was an early pterosaur, living in the early Jurassic of England, around 190 million years ago, in coastal environments, in cliffs and beaches where it nested, where it hunted, where it lived in colonies. Dimorphodon had a wingspan of about 1.5 meters, and it was notable for its large head, its deep jaws, its teeth that were differentiated, with long fangs at the front and smaller teeth at the back, suggesting a diet that included fish, insects, and small vertebrates. The body was compact, the tail was long and stiff, serving as a rudder, as a stabilizer, and the wings were broad, designed for maneuverability, for flying in cluttered environments, for navigating through forests, along cliff faces, in spaces where agility was more important than speed. The lifestyle of Dimorphodon is inferred from its anatomy, from the structure of its skull, from the shape of its teeth, from the proportions of its limbs. It was likely a generalist, feeding on whatever was available, catching insects in flight, snatching fish from the water, scavenging on beaches, hunting small lizards and mammals. It may have been quadrupedal on the ground, walking on all fours, using its wings as front limbs, folding them when not in flight, and this mode of locomotion is supported by trackways, by fossilized footprints that show pterosaurs walking, moving across mudflats, across beaches, leaving behind traces of their passage. Pteranodon was one of the most famous pterosaurs, living in the late Cretaceous of North America, around 85 to 80 million years ago, in the western interior seaway, the vast shallow sea that split the continent. Pteranodon had a wingspan of up to 7 meters, and it was a soaring specialist, built for long-distance flight, for riding thermals, for gliding over the ocean, covering hundreds of kilometers in search of food, in search of fish, in search of squid that rose to the surface at night. Its wings were long, narrow, high aspect ratio, designed for efficiency, for minimizing drag, for maximizing lift, and its body was lightweight, streamlined, with hollow bones, with air sacs, with every adaptation for reducing weight, for making flight easier, for staying aloft with minimal effort. The head of Pteranodon was dominated by a large crest, a bony extension of the skull that projected backward, that varied in size and shape between individuals, between sexes. The crest was likely used for display, for species recognition, for sexual selection, with larger crests indicating fitness, indicating genetic quality. The crest may also have served an aerodynamic function, acting as a rudder, helping to stabilize the head during flight, helping to control direction, helping to compensate for the long toothless beak that extended forward, that was used for catching fish, for scooping prey from the water, for feeding on the wing. The flight style of Pteranodon was soaring, gliding, using rising air currents to gain altitude, to travel long distances without flapping, without expending energy. Pteranodon would have launched from cliffs, from coastal bluffs, spreading its wings, catching the wind, rising on updrafts, on thermals, spiraling upward, gaining height, and then gliding, soaring, covering vast distances over the ocean, scanning the surface for signs of fish, for the ripples, the splashes, the disturbances that indicated prey. When it spotted food, it would descend, would dive, would skim the surface, dipping its beak into the water, snatching fish, swallowing them whole, and then returning to the air, to the freedom of flight, to the endless sky. Quetzalcoatlus was the largest known flying animal that ever lived, a giant among giants, with a wingspan that reached 10 to 11 meters, rivaling that of a small airplane. It lived in the late Cretaceous of North America, around 68 to 66 million years ago in inland environments, in floodplains and river valleys far from the sea, and it was not a fish-eater like Pteranodon, but a terrestrial hunter, a stalker, an animal that walked on the ground, that hunted on foot, that used its size, its reach, its long neck and beak to capture prey that other predators could not. The anatomy of Quetzalcoatlus was extraordinary, adapted for a lifestyle that was unique among pterosaurs. Its neck was long, flexible, capable of extending, of reaching, of striking like a heron, and its beak was massive, over 2.5 meters in length, toothless, sharp-edged, capable of snapping shut with tremendous force, of capturing small dinosaurs, mammals, lizards, anything that moved, anything that could be swallowed. Its legs were long, powerful, built for walking, for standing, for moving across the landscape, and when it walked, it moved quadrupedally, using its wings as front limbs, folding them, supporting its weight, moving with a gait that was awkward, ungainly, but effective. The question of how Quetzalcoatlus took flight has been the subject of much debate. An animal of this size, weighing perhaps 200 to 250 kilograms, could not simply run and leap into the air like a bird. Instead, it likely used a quadrupedal launch, crouching down, pushing off with all four limbs simultaneously, using the powerful muscles of its arms and legs to vault itself into the air, to gain the initial altitude needed to spread its wings, to catch the wind, to begin flying. Once airborne, Quetzalcoatlus was a master of the sky, soaring on thermals, gliding for hours, covering hundreds of kilometers, using its size, its wingspan, its efficiency to dominate the aerial realm, to exploit resources that no other animal could. The flight capabilities of Quetzalcoatlus were remarkable. Despite its size, it was capable of sustained powered flight, of flapping its wings, of generating thrust, of climbing, of maneuvering, though it likely spent most of its time soaring, gliding, conserving energy. The wing membrane was strong, reinforced, capable of withstanding the stresses of flight, of supporting the weight of the animal, of generating the lift needed to stay aloft. The bones were hollow, thin-walled, incredibly light but also incredibly strong, with internal struts, with cross-bracing, with structural adaptations that maximize strength while minimizing weight, that allowed an animal of this size to fly, to defy gravity, to rule the skies. Tupandactylus was a tape-jarrid pterosaur living in the early Cretaceous of Brazil around 115 million years ago in a landscape of lakes and forests, of volcanic activity and seasonal floods. Tupandactylus had a wingspan of about 5 meters, and it was remarkable for its enormous crest, a structure that extended both forward and backward from the skull, that was larger than the skull itself, that was composed of bone and soft tissue, and that was likely brightly coloured, used for display, for attracting mates, for establishing dominance, for communicating with other members of its species. The crest of Tupandactylus was not solid bone but a framework, a scaffolding covered by skin, by keratin, by soft tissues that increased its size, its visibility, its impact. The crest was sexually dimorphic, varying between males and females, with males having larger, more elaborate crests, suggesting that sexual selection played a role in its evolution, that individuals with larger crests were more successful at attracting mates, at reproducing, at passing on their genes. The crest would have been a liability in flight, creating drag, creating instability, but the benefits of display, of communication, of sexual selection, outweighed the costs, and the crest persisted, evolved, became more elaborate, more extreme, more spectacular. Pterodaustro was a filter-feeding pterosaur, living in the early Cretaceous of Argentina, around 105 million years ago, in shallow lakes, in lagoons, in environments similar to those inhabited by modern flamingos. Pterodaustro had a wingspan of about 2.5 meters, and it had a unique feeding apparatus with a lower jaw that was lined with thousands of thin, bristle-like teeth, forming a comb, a filter, that was used to strain small invertebrates, small crustaceans, small organisms from the water. The upper jaw had small, peg-like teeth that interlocked with the lower teeth, creating a sieve, a mesh, that trapped food while allowing water to pass through. The feeding behavior of Pterodaustro was similar to that of modern flamingos, wading through shallow water, sweeping its head from side to side, filtering food from the water, from the mud, from the sediment. The diet consisted of small crustaceans, of brine shrimp, of other invertebrates that lived in the lakes, and the consumption of these organisms, rich in carotenoids, may have given Pterodaustro a pink coloration, similar to that of flamingos, making it one of the most colourful, most visually striking pterosaurs, a creature that would have stood out against the landscape, against the water, against the sky. Anhanguera was a large pterosaur living in the early Cretaceous of Brazil, around 110 million years ago, in coastal environments, in lagoons and estuaries where it hunted fish, where it soared over the water, where it lived in colonies, in groups, in social structures that may have been complex, hierarchical, organized. Anhanguera had a wingspan of about 4.5 meters, and it had a distinctive crest on both the upper and lower jaws, forming a keel, a structure that may have been used for cutting through the water, for stabilizing the head during surface feeding, for ploughing through waves, for catching fish that swam near the surface. The teeth of Anhanguera were conical, sharp, interlocking, designed for gripping slippery prey, for holding fish, for preventing escape. And the jaws were long, narrow, built for speed, for snapping shut quickly, for catching fast-moving prey. Anhanguera likely fed by flying low over the water, skimming the surface, dipping its beak into the water, snatching fish, and then lifting off, swallowing the prey in flight, continuing to hunt, continuing to feed, exploiting the rich marine resources of the Cretaceous seas. Nyctosaurus was a late Cretaceous pterosaur, living around 80 to 5 million years ago in the western interior seaway, and it was remarkable for its enormous crest, a structure that extended upward from the skull that was formed by elongated bones that reached heights of up to 1.5 meters, creating a sail-like structure that dwarfed the animal's body. The function of this crest is debated. Some paleontologists believe it supported a membrane, a sail, that was used for display, for thermoregulation, for species recognition. Others believe it was purely structural, purely bony, used for aerodynamic purposes, for stabilizing the head during flight, for controlling direction, for compensating for the long beak. The diversity of pterosaur crests, the variety of shapes, sizes, and structures suggests that they served multiple functions, that they were used for display, for communication, for thermoregulation, for aerodynamics, and that different species, different lineages, different environments favored different solutions, different adaptations, different evolutionary paths. The crests were windows into the social lives of pterosaurs, into their behaviors, into their interactions, and they reveal a world that was complex, that was colorful, that was filled with visual signals, with displays, with communication, with the rich social dynamics that characterize many modern animals. The extinction of pterosaurs occurred at the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, in the same event that killed the non-avian dinosaurs, the marine reptiles, and countless other species. The asteroid impact, the environmental catastrophe that followed, the collapse of ecosystems, the loss of food sources, all contributed to the demise of the pterosaurs, and within a geologically brief period, they were gone, vanished, leaving behind only fossils, only bones, only the silent testimony of wings that once ruled the sky, that once soared over a world that is now lost, now gone, now preserved only in stone. And as you rest, as you float on the edge of sleep, you can imagine the Mesozoic skies, filled with wings, with the silent glide of pterosaurs, with creatures that moved through the air with grace, with power, with the effortless mastery of animals that were born to fly, that lived to fly, that ruled the clouds for over 160 million years. The giants of the sky, the quiet masters of the aerial realm, the first vertebrates to conquer the air, to leave the earth behind, to soar into the endless blue, into the freedom of flight, into the realm of wind and light and boundless space. In the quiet moments of the Mesozoic, when the sun hung low over nesting grounds and the air was filled with the soft calls of hatchlings, when parents returned with food, when siblings huddled together for warmth, the dinosaurs revealed a side of themselves that was tender, protective, social, a side that speaks not of violence and predation, but of care, of community, of the bonds that held families together, that ensured the survival of the next generation, that wove the social fabric of ancient life, the discovery of dinosaur nesting sites, of eggs arranged in patterns, of embryos preserved in various stages of development, of hatchlings that died together, of adults that remained with their young, has transformed our understanding of dinosaur behavior, has revealed that many species were not solitary, not isolated, but social, gregarious, living in groups, raising their young communally, protecting their nests, their eggs, their offspring from predators, from the elements, from the countless dangers that threatened survival in the Mesozoic world. Maiasaura, whose name means good mother lizard, was a hadrosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur, living in the late Cretaceous of Montana around 76 million years ago, in coastal plains and river valleys, where vegetation was abundant, where water was plentiful, where conditions were ideal for nesting, for raising young, for establishing colonies. Maiasaura was 7 to 9 meters long, weighing around 3 tons, and it was a herbivore feeding on the flowering plants, the ferns, the conifers that covered the landscape, and it lived in herds, in groups that numbered in the thousands, moving together, feeding together, nesting together in vast colonies that stretched for kilometers. The nesting sites of Maiasaura, discovered in Montana in the 1970s, revealed a complex social structure, a level of parental care that was unprecedented among dinosaurs. The nests were bowl-shaped depressions scraped into the ground, lined with vegetation spaced evenly apart, about 7 meters from each other, the distance of an adult Maiasaura lying down, suggesting that the adults remained at the nests, guarding them, protecting them, incubating them with their body heat, with the heat of decomposing vegetation. Each nest contained 15 to 20 eggs, arranged in a spiral pattern, and the eggs were large, about the size of grapefruits, with thick shells that protected the developing embryos. The hatchlings of Maiasaura were small, about 30 centimeters long, and they were altricial, meaning they were helpless at birth, unable to walk, unable to feed themselves, dependent on their parents for food, for protection, for care. The bones of the hatchlings were poorly ossified, not fully formed, and their teeth showed wear, evidence that they had been feeding, that they had been eating, that they had been cared for in the nest for weeks, perhaps months, until they were strong enough, large enough, developed enough to leave, to join the herd, to begin their lives as independent animals. This level of parental care, this extended period of dependency, is rare among reptiles, more common among birds and mammals, and it suggests that Maiasaura, and perhaps other hadrosaurs, had complex social behaviors, had strong family bonds, had strategies for ensuring the survival of their offspring. The nesting colonies of Maiasaura were massive, covering areas of several square kilometers, with thousands of nests, tens of thousands of individuals, adults and juveniles and hatchlings all living together, all interacting, all part of a community that was structured, organized, cooperative. The adults would have taken turns guarding the colony, watching for predators, for threats, while others fed, while others tended the nests, while others cared for the young. The hatchlings would have grown rapidly, doubling in size every few weeks, and as they grew, they would have moved from the nest to the periphery of the colony, forming creches, nursery groups, where they stayed together, where they learned from each other, where they were protected by the adults, by the herd, by the collective vigilance of the community. Overactive, whose name unfortunately means egg thief, was a small theropod living in the late Cretaceous of Mongolia around 75 million years ago, in desert environments, in sand dunes and dry lake beds. Overactive was 1 to 2 meters long, weighing around 20 to 30 kilograms, and it was originally thought to be a nest raider, a predator that fed on the eggs of other dinosaurs, because the first specimen was found on top of a nest of eggs that were believed to belong to Protoceratops. However, later discoveries revealed that the eggs actually belonged to Oviraptor itself, and the adult was not stealing eggs but brooding them, sitting on them, incubating them, protecting them, behaving like a modern bird. The nesting behavior of Oviraptor has been confirmed by multiple specimens, by fossils that show adults sitting on nests, with their arms spread over the eggs, with their bodies positioned to cover the clutch, to provide warmth, to shield the eggs from the elements, from predators, from danger. The eggs were arranged in a ring, in a circular pattern, with the center of the nest left open, and the adult sat in the center, with its legs folded beneath it, with its arms extended outward, covering the eggs, maintaining contact, maintaining temperature, ensuring that the embryos developed properly, that they hatched successfully, that the next generation survived. The discovery of brooding overactive fossils was a revelation, a vindication, a correction of a long-standing misunderstanding, and it showed that theropods, the group that includes the fearsome predators, the tyrannosaurs, the raptors, were also capable of tenderness, of care, of behaviors that we associate with birds, with animals that nurture their young, that invest in their offspring, that sacrifice their own safety, their own comfort, for the survival of the next generation. The oviraptor on the nest, frozen in time, preserved in the moment of death, is one of the most poignant fossils ever discovered, a snapshot of parental devotion, of the bond between parent and offspring, of the lengths to which animals will go to protect their young. Psittacosaurus was a small ceratopsian, a distant relative of Triceratops, living in the early Cretaceous of China and Mongolia, around 120 million years ago, in forests and floodplains, where it fed on low-growing vegetation, on ferns, on cycads, on the early flowering plants that were beginning to diversify, to spread, to transform the Mesozoic landscape. Psittacosaurus was 1 to 2 meters long, weighing around 20 kilograms, and it was a bipedal herbivore, walking on its hind legs, using its beak to crop vegetation, using its hands to manipulate food, to bring it to its mouth, to process it before swallowing. One of the most remarkable Psittacosaurus fossils ever found shows an adult with 34 juveniles, all preserved together, all huddled around the adult, all part of a family group, a creche, a nursery. The juveniles were of similar size, suggesting they were from the same cohort, the same breeding season, and they were being cared for by the adult, being protected, being guided, being taught how to find food, how to avoid predators, how to survive. This fossil provides direct evidence of extended parental care in dinosaurs, of adults remaining with their young for extended periods, of social structures that went beyond simple nesting, but involved teaching, learning, the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. The preservation of this fossil, the fact that all 35 individuals died together, suggests a catastrophic event, a sudden disaster, perhaps a volcanic eruption, a flood, a sandstorm, something that overwhelmed them, that buried them quickly, that preserved them in the moment of death. The adult is positioned protectively, with the juveniles clustered around it, seeking shelter, seeking safety, and the scene is heartbreaking, tragic, a reminder that the Mesozoic world was dangerous, unpredictable, that survival was never guaranteed, that even the most devoted parent, the most protective adult, could not always save its young from the forces of nature, from the randomness of catastrophe, from the inevitability of death. Triceratops was one of the last dinosaurs living in the very latest Cretaceous of North America, around 68 to 66 million years ago, in the final moments of the Mesozoic, in the years and decades leading up to the asteroid impact, the mass extinction, the end of an era. Triceratops was 8 to 9 meters long, weighing between 6 and 12 tons, and it was a herbivore, feeding on the low-growing vegetation of the plains, the forests, the river valleys, using its beak to crop plants, using its batteries of teeth to grind them, to process them, to extract nutrients from the tough, fibrous material. The social behavior of Triceratops is inferred from bone beds, from mass death assemblages where multiple individuals of different ages are found together, suggesting that they lived in herds, that they moved together, particularly the young, the vulnerable, the weak. The horns and frill of Triceratops were likely used for defense, for fighting off predators like Tyrannosaurus, but they were also used for intraspecific combat, for fighting with other Triceratops, for establishing dominance, for competing for mates, for territory, for resources. The frills show evidence of healed wounds, of punctures, of damage consistent with horn strikes, with combat, with the violent clashes that occurred between rivals, between males competing for females, between individuals establishing their place in the social hierarchy. The relationship between Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus is one of the most iconic predator-prey dynamics in paleontology, and fossils provide evidence of their interactions, of their conflicts, of the life and death struggles that played out on the plains of North America in the final days of the Cretaceous. Triceratops bones have been found with Tyrannosaurus bite marks, with tooth gouges, with evidence of feeding, of scavenging, of predation. Some bones show healed wounds, evidence that the Triceratops survived the attack, that it escaped, that it lived to fight another day, and this suggests that Triceratops was formidable, dangerous, capable of defending itself, capable of driving off even the most powerful predator. Protoceratops was a smaller ceratopsian, living in the late Cretaceous of Mongolia, around 75 million years ago, in desert environments similar to those inhabited by Velociraptor, by Oviraptor, by the other dinosaurs of the Gobi Desert. Protoceratops was 1.5 to 2 meters long, weighing around 60 to 80 kilograms, and it was a herbivore, feeding on the sparse vegetation of the desert, on the tough, drought-resistant plants that grew in the sand, in the dry lake beds, in the wadis and gullies where water occasionally flowed. The nesting sites of Protoceratops have been found in Mongolia, with nests containing up to 15 eggs, arranged in layers, in spirals, suggesting that the female returned to the nest multiple times, laying eggs over a period of days or weeks, and then covering them with sand with vegetation, allowing the heat of the sun, the heat of decomposition, to incubate them, to bring them to the temperature needed for development. The nests were often located in the same areas, in nesting grounds, in colonies, suggesting that Protoceratops, like Maiasaura, nested communally, that they returned to the same sites year after year, that they had traditional nesting grounds, places that were safe, that were suitable, that were known, that were passed down through generations. Stegosaurus, the iconic plated dinosaur, lived in the late Jurassic of North America, around 150 million years ago, in the same landscapes as Allosaurus, as Diplodocus, as Brachiosaurus. Stegosaurus was 7 to 9 meters long, weighing around 5 tons, and it was a herbivore, feeding on low-growing vegetation, on ferns, on cycads, on the plants that grew close to the ground, and it used its small head, its weak jaws, its simple teeth to crop plants, to process them, to consume them in large quantities to sustain its massive body. The plates on the back of Stegosaurus, the distinctive double row of bony structures that ran from the neck to the tail, have been the subject of much debate. They were not armor, not protective, because they were covered in skin, in blood vessels, in soft tissue, and they were too thin, too fragile to withstand attacks, to deflect bites, to provide defense. Instead, they were likely used for thermoregulation, for display, for species recognition, and they may have been brightly colored, flushed with blood, used to signal to other Stegosaurus to attract mates, to warn rivals, to communicate in the visual language of the Mesozoic. The tail of Stegosaurus ended in 4 large spikes, the thagomizer, a weapon that was formidable, dangerous, capable of inflicting serious wounds on predators, on rivals, on anything that threatened the animal. The spikes were sharp, pointed, and they could be swung with tremendous force, driven by the powerful muscles of the tail, and they could penetrate flesh, could break bones, could kill. Evidence of Stegosaurus tail spikes embedded in the bones of Allosaurus has been found, showing that these weapons were used, that they were effective, that Stegosaurus was not defenseless, was not passive, was capable of fighting back, of protecting itself, of surviving in a world filled with predators. The social behavior of Stegosaurus is uncertain, but trackways suggest that they may have moved in groups, in small herds, in family units, and this would have provided protection, would have increased vigilance, would have allowed individuals to watch for predators, while others fed, while others rested, while others cared for the young. The Mesozoic world was a world of communities, of social structures, of bonds that connected individuals, that created networks of cooperation, of mutual aid, of collective survival. And these bonds, these relationships, these connections were as important to the success of dinosaurs as their size, their strength, their adaptations, their evolutionary innovations. And as you drift deeper into rest, as the images of the Mesozoic fade, you can hold in your mind the gentle side of these ancient creatures. The parents brooding their eggs, the hatchlings huddled together, the herds moving across the plains, the families protecting their young, the social fabric that connected them, that sustained them, that allowed them to thrive for over 160 million years. The bonds of care, of community, of life itself, woven through deep time, preserved in stone, waiting to be discovered, to be understood, to be remembered. 66 million years ago, on an ordinary day in the late Cretaceous, under a sky that had seen the rise and fall of countless species, the reign of the dinosaurs came to an end, not with a gradual decline, not with a slow fade into extinction, but with a sudden, catastrophic event that changed the world forever, that ended an era that closed a chapter in the history of life on Earth. The asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, in what is now Mexico, impacting with the force of billions of nuclear weapons, creating a crater 180 kilometers wide, vaporizing rock, sending shockwaves around the globe, triggering earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and igniting fires that consumed forests, that turned the sky black with smoke, that blocked out the sun for months, perhaps years. The impact threw billions of tons of debris into the atmosphere, creating a global winter, a darkness that descended over the planet, that stopped photosynthesis, that collapsed food chains, that killed plants, that starved herbivores, that eliminated the prey that carnivores depended on, that cascaded through ecosystems, that caused a mass extinction. The fifth great dying, the event that ended the Mesozoic and began the Cenozoic, the age of mammals, the age that would eventually give rise to us. The dinosaurs, except for the birds, perished. The pterosaurs vanished. The marine reptiles disappeared. The ammonites, the ancient cephalopods that had survived for hundreds of millions of years, went extinct. 75% of all species on Earth died, and the world that emerged from the ashes was different, quieter, emptier, a world without the giants, without the thunder of sauropod footsteps, without the roar of tyrannosaurs, without the silent glide of pterosaurs, without the splash of mosasaurs. A world that had to rebuild, that had to recover, that had to evolve new forms, new species, new ecosystems to fill the void left by the dinosaurs. But the dinosaurs did not disappear entirely. They left behind fossils, bones turned to stone, preserved in sediments, in rocks, in layers of earth that accumulated over millions of years, that buried the remains, that protected them from decay, that transformed them into the archives of deep time, into the records of ancient life, into the evidence that allows us, 66 million years later, to reconstruct their world, to understand their lives, to marvel at their diversity, their adaptations, their beauty. Fossils are windows into the past, portals to vanished worlds, and they are formed through a process that is rare, that requires specific conditions, that depends on chance, on luck, on the alignment of circumstances that allow organic material to be preserved, to be mineralized, to be transformed from flesh and bone into stone. When an animal dies, its body is usually consumed by scavengers, by bacteria, by the processes of decay, and within weeks or months nothing remains but scattered bones. And even these are broken down, are weathered, are eroded, are returned to the soil, to the cycle of nutrients, to the living world. But occasionally, rarely, the body is buried quickly, covered by sediment, by sand, by mud, by volcanic ash, and this burial protects it from scavengers, from oxygen, from the elements. And the process of fossilization begins. Over time, over thousands, millions of years, the organic material in the bones is replaced by minerals, by silica, by calcite, by iron, and the bone itself becomes stone, becomes a fossil, a replica of the original, preserving the shape, the structure, the details of the animal that once lived. The sediments around the fossil harden, become rock, and the fossil is entombed, locked in stone, waiting, sometimes for hundreds of millions of years, until erosion, until weathering, until the forces of geology bring it back to the surface, expose it to the light, make it available to be found, to be studied, to be understood, the conditions required for exceptional preservation, for the fossilization of soft tissues, of feathers, of skin, of internal organs, are even rarer, requiring rapid burial in fine-grained sediments, in environments with low oxygen, with specific chemical conditions that prevent decay, that allow mineralization to occur before the tissues decompose. The Lagerstätten, the sites of exceptional preservation, are treasures of paleontology, providing insights that ordinary fossils cannot, revealing the colors of feathers, the patterns of skin, the contents of stomachs, the structures of muscles, the details that bring ancient animals to life, that transform them from skeletons into living, breathing creatures. The study of fossils, paleontology, is a science of reconstruction, of inference, of piecing together fragmentary evidence to create a picture of the past, to understand how ancient animals lived, how they moved, how they fed, how they reproduced, how they interacted with their environment, with each other. Every fossil is a clue, a piece of a puzzle, and paleontologists use anatomy, geology, chemistry, physics, biology, and countless other disciplines to interpret these clues, to build models, to test hypotheses, to refine our understanding of the Mesozoic world. The first dinosaur fossils were discovered in the early 19th century in England, in rocks that were being quarried for construction, for roads, for buildings, and these fossils, strange, gigantic, unlike anything alive, sparked curiosity, sparked debate, sparked the realization that the Earth had a deep history, that it had been inhabited by creatures that no longer existed, that had lived and died long before humans appeared. The word dinosaur, meaning terrible lizard, was coined in 1842 by Richard Owen, and it captured the imagination of the public, of scientists, of artists, and it launched a field of study that continues to this day, that continues to discover new species, new insights, new wonders. The bone wars of the late 19th century, the fierce rivalry between paleontologists Edward Drinker Cope and Othniel Charles Marsh, drove the discovery of dozens of new dinosaur species in the American West, in the Morrison Formation, in the Badlands of Wyoming, Colorado, Montana. The competition was intense, sometimes unethical, with both men racing to name new species to claim priority to outdo each other, and while their methods were questionable, their legacy is undeniable. They brought dinosaurs to the public consciousness. They filled museums with specimens. They established paleontology as a legitimate scientific discipline. They laid the foundation for all subsequent research. The discovery of dinosaur fossils has accelerated in recent decades, with new species being named at a rate of dozens per year, and these discoveries are not limited to remote deserts or exotic locations, but occur around the world, in every continent, in rocks of every age, revealing a diversity that was unimaginable, a richness that continues to surprise, to astonish, to challenge our assumptions about what dinosaurs were, how they lived, how they evolved. The fossils from China, preserved in fine-grained lake sediments, have revealed feathered dinosaurs, have shown that many theropods were covered in plumage, that they were colourful, dynamic, bird-like. The fossils from Argentina have revealed the largest land animals that ever lived, the giant sauropods that weighed as much as 10 elephants, that stretched 30 meters from head to tail, that dominated the Cretaceous landscapes of South America. The fossils from North America, from the Morrison Formation, from the Hell Creek Formation, have provided the iconic dinosaurs, the ones that populate museums, that appear in books, that capture the imagination of children and adults alike. Allosaurus, Stegosaurus, Diplodocus, Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus rex. These fossils are not just bones, not just static objects, but narratives, stories written in stone, tales of predation, of growth, of injury, of healing, of life and death in the Mesozoic. Some fossils preserve evidence of behavior, of actions frozen in time. The fighting dinosaurs from Mongolia show a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in combat, dying together, preserved in the moment of struggle. The brooding oviraptor fossils show adults sitting on nests, protecting eggs, exhibiting parental care. The trackways, the fossilized footprints, show dinosaurs walking, running, moving in herds, and they provide information about locomotion, about speed, about social behavior, about the daily lives of these animals. Other fossils preserve soft tissues, rare and precious, providing glimpses of anatomy that bones alone cannot reveal. Feather impressions show the plumage of theropods, the colours, the patterns, the structures. Skin impressions show scales, textures, the external appearance of dinosaurs. Stomach contents show what they ate, what their last meal was, providing direct evidence of diet, of feeding behaviour. Coprolites fossilised dung reveal information about digestion, about gut contents, about the plants and animals that were consumed, that passed through the digestive system, that were excreted, that became part of the fossil record. The technology used to study fossils has advanced dramatically, moving beyond simple excavation and description to include CT scanning, which reveals internal structures without damaging specimens. Isotope analysis, which provides information about diet, about temperature, about migration patterns. Biomechanical modeling, which tests hypotheses about locomotion, about bite force, about the physical capabilities of extinct animals. These technologies have transformed paleontology, have allowed researchers to ask questions that were previously unanswerable, to test ideas that were previously impossible. The legacy of the dinosaurs is not just in fossils, not just in bones and stones, but in the living world, in the birds that descended from theropod dinosaurs, that inherited their bipedal stance, their hollow bones, their feathers, their respiratory system, their behaviours. Birds are dinosaurs, the only lineage that survived the end Cretaceous extinction, the only dinosaurs that still walk, still fly, still sing, still fill the world with life, with colour, with movement. When you see a sparrow, a hawk, a heron, you are seeing a dinosaur, a descendant of the Mesozoic giants, a living link to a world that is gone, a reminder that extinction is not always total, that life finds a way, that evolution continues, that the story is not over. The study of dinosaurs has implications beyond paleontology, beyond the reconstruction of ancient ecosystems. It informs our understanding of evolution, of adaptation, of the processes that drive the diversification of life, the extinction of species, the recovery of ecosystems after catastrophe. It provides context for the current biodiversity crisis, for the sixth mass extinction that is unfolding now, driven not by an asteroid but by human activity, by habitat destruction, by climate change, by pollution, by the countless ways that we are altering the planet, that we are changing the conditions that support life. that we are pushing species toward extinction at rates that rival those of the great dyings of the past. The dinosaurs remind us that extinction is real, that it is final, that once a species is gone, it is gone forever, that the loss is irreversible, that the world is diminished, that the tapestry of life is torn, that the connections, the relationships, the ecological roles are severed, are lost, are mourned by those who understand, who care, who recognize the value, the beauty, the intrinsic worth of every living thing. The dinosaurs also remind us that life is resilient, that it recovers, that it adapts, that it evolves new forms, new species, new ecosystems, but that this recovery takes time, takes millions of years, and that the world that emerges is different, is not the same, is not a replacement, but a new creation, a new chapter, a new story. And so, as you rest, as you prepare for sleep, you can think of the dinosaurs not with sadness, not with regret, but with wonder, with gratitude, with appreciation for the fact that they existed, that they lived, that they thrived for over 160 million years, that they filled the world with diversity, with beauty, with the endless forms most beautiful, and that they left behind a legacy, a record, a testament to the power of life, to the creativity of evolution, to the deep time that stretches behind us, that connects us to the past, that reminds us that we are part of a story that is vast, ancient, ongoing. The fossils sleep in stone, waiting to be found, waiting to tell their stories, waiting to reveal the secrets of the Mesozoic. And as you sleep, as you drift into dreams, you join them, you enter the realm of deep time, of ancient worlds, of vanished creatures. And you rest in the knowledge that the dinosaurs, though gone, are not forgotten, that they live on in fossils, in birds, in our imagination, in our wonder, in the quiet moments when we pause, when we reflect, when we remember that the earth is old, that life is ancient, that we are newcomers, that we are guests, that we are part of a continuum that stretches back billions of years, that will continue long after we are gone, that will endure, that will evolve, that will create new wonders, new forms, new stories. Sleep now in the company of giants, in the shadow of deep time, in the eternal rest that comes to all living things, in the peace that follows the final sunset, in the quiet that settles over the world when the day is done, when the light fades, when the stars appear, when the ancient earth turns slowly through the darkness, carrying the fossils, carrying the memories, carrying the legacy of the dinosaurs, the gentle giants, the fierce predators, the soaring flyers, the swimming reptiles, the social families, the tender parents, the creatures that once ruled the world, that once filled the land, the sea, the sky, and that now sleep forever in stone, in silence, in the eternal embrace of deep time. Good night.